Hey church, welcome to Truth in 10, where the goal is to think Christianly or to think biblically. And this is Truth in 10 number 10. And so to celebrate, let's try and keep it within 10 minutes. Today we're going to talk about Sabbath. Now Sabbath is a word you've probably heard if you've been around the church any amount of time, but we don't always know what that means. People don't always have an understanding of Sabbath, and maybe you've heard it and you kind of know it's this law about taking a day off. And anyway, let's get into what the Sabbath means for us today in the church. Now, just really quickly, a little biblical history of the Sabbath. So the very beginning seeds of the Sabbath were in creation. The creation story, we see God make the world in 6 days, and then on the seventh day, he rests. And it's kind of weird because God doesn't need to rest, but he takes a day to rest and enjoy all that he's created. Then we see, as you fast forward, when the law comes and Israel is taken out of Egypt and they're a new nation and they don't know how to function, God gives them all these laws. And one law was the Sabbath. It was on the seventh day, which for them would have been a Saturday, a Friday night to a Saturday night. On the seventh day, you are to rest. They were to do no work. They weren't to go too far away from their homes. They weren't to carry certain things and do anything that was, work. And there were very serious consequences for profaning the Sabbath. The Sabbath was to be a holy day, and they had multiple different kinds of Sabbaths to do with festivals as well. But the traditional Sabbath was the seventh day they would rest. And we see as you go through the scriptures that people stopped caring about it. And we see sometimes, for example, Nehemiah, in his time, people weren't caring about the Sabbath, and he got near violent with people saying, you will not profane the Sabbath. You will care about the Sabbath, and you'll be serious about it. And all over, we see God again and again say, hey, keep my Sabbath holy. Now, then, as we get into the New Testament, you have people who go overboard with that, called the Pharisees, and they go so far into the Sabbath that they make the Sabbath a law in itself that it, like they're putting all these burdens on people, and they're putting all these fences around the Sabbath, and you can't do this, and actually you can't, this thing's illegal, but then we're going to say actually this is illegal because that could lead you to that, and then we're going to say this is illegal because that could lead you to that, could lead you to that. And so they made all these fences, and we see Jesus come in and start breaking some of those fences intentionally. It seems like he's doing things where it's not illegal according to God's law, but the Pharisees said that's not according to our law. Like you're breaking the law. Jesus would come with his disciples, and they'd come and they'd rub the grain, and they'd take and eat from the grain. And the Pharisees would say, hey, we're not supposed to harvest. And Jesus, they're not harvesting, but they're breaking the rules that the people had made around the Sabbath. And basically what Jesus says is, you've twisted it all around. This law wasn't about a law in itself. It wasn't like to make something to burden you. What he says is, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. It wasn't like we were made to uphold the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made to help us. And so we have this question, like, how do we relate to this in Christ? Okay, the Sabbath was a very serious law in the Old Testament. If Jesus says, well, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, but there's this law in the Old Testament, like it's number 3 on the 10 Commandments. So, are we supposed to obey all the 10 Commandments? You hear people say that sometimes, well, there's all these laws, but really we're supposed to do the 10 Commandments. Well, resting on the seventh day on Friday night to Saturday night was in the 10 Commandments. So what do we do about this? And then what do we do with the way some people approach it is, hey, in Hebrews it says that we've actually entered the rest of God, and so that must mean that the Sabbath is gone, and that command to do the Sabbath is gone. Or some people say, well, we move the Sabbath to Sunday, and that means we have to go to church on Sunday and not do any other work on Sunday. And there's been all these ways of interpreting it, and it has some to do with the question of what is the Christian's relationship to the Old Testament law. Are we supposed to follow all of it, or some of it, or none of it? Or do we pick and choose what pieces we're supposed to follow? And, how do we decide that? That's for another video. But today I just want to talk about the application of Sabbath. Now, I will say this. Do I think Sabbath is a law that if you're not following, God's mad at you? No, I don't think so. That is not how we relate to the Old Testament law. And we are not bound by the legality of we need to take the seventh day off or the Saturday off or whatever. But I do think, like Jesus said, the Sabbath was made for us. The Sabbath was made to help us. The Sabbath is a rhythm given in your week that changes how your body and soul will function if you're following it. It's good for you. And so I want to get into a little bit of application. What is the Sabbath? How do we do it? So first of all, I want to say what the Sabbath is not. Some people think, well, you look at the Old Testament and the Sabbath must be staying in your house all day because that's what they did in the wilderness. It must be praying and reading your Bible all day. And like Sabbath is this boring thing where we just need to sit at home and read our Bible and pray all day. That's not Sabbath. What Sabbath is I would describe it like a trellis. So a trellis is something that is a structure you set up to help something grow, right? Grapevines, you'd put a trellis and the grapevines would grow up the trellis. It's a structure that helps growth. And there's a lot of these type of things in the Bible, and I think Sabbath is one of those for us. It's like a spiritual discipline that helps us. So when we talk about Sabbath, as a Christian, we're not saying you have to take Saturday off every week. What I think we should recognize, though, is that the 1 in 7 days rhythm is something God has installed as part of creation, and it will feed your soul. Does it have to be Saturday or does it have to be Sunday? No, I don't take a Sabbath on Saturday or Sunday. Monday is when I take a day off, Sunday night to Monday night usually. And what it is a day of celebration, a day of looking forward to the coming rest, a day of praying and playing and enjoying. And so let's think about this. So one thing is that we are pointing toward the Sabbath rest of God. Like one day we will enter full rest with God. And so when we take a day off to celebrate, we're using that day as a marker to point us to say, like, we're resting today because one day we will rest forever. And we're looking forward to that. And so that's like a little celebration of the new world, celebration of the worship of God. I like another thing that I've heard. I think it's by Mark Buchanan. And I'll link his book on the Sabbath in the description. But he describes Sabbath as resting from the ought-tos. So there are things that you do because you ought to do them. You know you're supposed to do them, and it's like this pressure, this burden. You need to do it, so you're going to do it. He says Sabbath is made to rest, to take rest from that. To take rest from the things that you're like, oh, I don't want to do, but I have to do. And so Sabbath is that day where there's those things you're supposed to do. Maybe for you it's laundry, maybe for you it's cooking a meal, maybe for you it's whatever, but you say, oh, I have to do it. Sabbath is a day to say, okay, we're preparing, as we're going to talk about in a second, but we're resting from that. I like the idea of, within reason, obviously, focusing a day on what you desire to do, what fills you up instead of what you should do. And so obviously we're not saying like forget honoring God, forget, living in righteousness. We're just going to have a wild day of whatever you want. No, that's not what it is. It's not like a yes day. It's a day where there are those things that fill you up, that are good, that are restful, that maybe you can't do on normal days of the week. We do those on Sabbath because it's a day of rest. Eugene Peterson said, Sabbath is about praying and playing, and I like that as well. But really, when it comes to work, when it comes to rest, Sabbath is a day where you trust God for the outcomes of your output and not relying on yourself. So what people I often try to rely on myself and say, well, God says it this way, but I want to do this because, that's the better way. And we do that with work. Well, I should rest, but I'm going to work because I need output, I need to do it. And Sabbath is like, I'm going to trust God with my work. I'm going to trust God with my performance, with my output, with my sales, with my whatever it is, whatever your work is. We don't think we know better and say, well, God says to rest, but I know better. We rest and trust in God. And so here's what I'd say. How do you do a Sabbath? It's something you work out as you go, but here's a few things. One is to plan for it, okay? Pick a day that's going to be your Sabbath. Let that be a rhythm. Maybe someone can't do the same day every week because their work schedule is crazy or whatever, but it's good to have a rhythm where it's the same day every week. So if possible, do that. Plan for a routine. Plan for things that you're going to do. Plan for things that you don't want to do. So if you're not going to do laundry, you're not going to cook meals, you're not going to do whatever around the house, then you need to plan, of course, that, I'm not going to do those things, so I'm going to do them ahead of time. I'm going to prepare meals before Sabbath so that I can have that rest. Now, obviously, that's hard when you have a young family and your kids don't, you can't stop dealing with your kids on Sabbath, but, this is, again, not a pressure thing. So it's not something that has to look a certain way to be a Sabbath. And then also plan for the positive. Like, what things could you do that will help you intentionally rest? Plan to do those things. A second thing, so plan. And the second is, don't be under pressure. Jesus himself came and said the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, or woman for the Sabbath. We weren't made to adhere to this and it should be this pressure thing or you're not right with God. That's not what Sabbath is about. So don't live under that pressure. The last thing is, don't expect perfection, okay? This is something you work through over time. This is, in my family, we're still developing this. We have little habits and routines we do. We try to, the night of that Sabbath is beginning, we try to have a candle at dinner just to kind of mark the celebration. We make sure that we're not working and all these kind of things. But this is not an instant, all of a sudden you have a Sabbath and you're good and your life's completely changed forever. This is a long-term rhythm that takes time to develop. It's one of those things that you don't really see changing much in the short term, but over a long time you're going to look back and be like, wow, this rhythm of Sabbath has really given life to our family, life to me as an individual. And so that's what I have about Sabbath for today. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, but this is something God has given us to help us. And so I would really recommend thinking on this and not just dismissing it as, well, I can't take a day off. Figure it out, plan for it, try it, and see what happens. This has been Truth in 10. We'll see you next week.